Hello, and welcome to mentorDINO. I'm your host, Katelyn Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. I firmly believe that architecture, engineering, and construction professionals can achieve true success by embracing human skills as their guiding principle. So each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the AEC industry as a way to share stories, inspiration, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So if you like this episode, please do me a favor and hit subscribe, like, or leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own career journey. So let's dive in. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I would like to welcome Elaine Anderson and Andrea Lacour, founders of Contour Collective Accessibility Consultants out in Austin, Texas. Thank you, Elaine and Andrea, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having us.
And I know I always start out with my loaded question of introducing yourselves and letting my listeners know a little bit about your journey and experience so far in your education career. So I'll let you guys each take your turns with that one.
Sure. I'll kick it off and then I'll hand it over to Elaine. We will probably talk a little bit more about some of the nuance of our journeys later on, because accessibility consulting is a very specialized niche field. So I do have a background in architectural design from University of Washington in Seattle. And prior to that, I actually wanted to be a photographer, but I had a ceramics teacher and I made some kind of, 3D sculpture. And they said, you really should think about being an architect. And that kind of just stuck with me for years. And then I pursued architecture. And I think somewhere along the way, I sort of had in the back of my mind that it wasn't the absolute perfect fit for me. And then I ended up actually teaching third grade for a year. And there's some stories about how that came along. But past that, I then moved to Austin and I started interning at an architecture firm in Austin. And then from there, I officed with another accessibility consultant and then started kind of doing half and half, and then decided that I really enjoyed the accessibility side of the profession and have been doing that now entirely for about 10 to 12 years.
And my name's Elaine Anderson. I'm also an accessibility consultant. And my journey, I'm an alumni from University of Texas in Arlington. We're the Mavericks, not the Longhorns. But I went to school for interior design. Interior architecture is really the focus of what I was going for. And I knew from young age that design is what I wanted to do. So I focused on that. And then I went into residential architecture and I did that for several years. And in the meantime, I decided to join the Navy and I got to travel abroad and was in the Middle East for some time to get more money to go to grad school and get my master's. But in the meantime, life happened and careers changed. And then I found myself being into accessibility as an extra side job, learning some code for the architecture firm, and found that I really enjoyed it because then I could be a part of a lot of different projects instead of being kind of married to a family for several years while their fancy house got built. So changing into the realm of multiple projects versus one was really interesting. And then the education aspect is always nice too, to help educate people the why behind the accessible components, why they're there. And then having our design backgrounds, we can be creative to help them come up with solutions. And so that's kind of where we are today in our journeys of careers and professions together.
Yeah. And just very different journeys, because not many people I talk to have gone off and been a teacher, gone into the Navy, and then coming together. So I expected more like side little pivots to both get there, and not like, I don't want to say extremes, but they're big pivots in a career. So how did you guys both meet?
So I always like to tell this story. I think it's very funny because Elaine actually interviewed me for a job at an architecture firm when I moved down to Austin. I hadn't worked for an architecture firm, even though I had a degree in it. And I, went around looking, for an internship essentially, or a low-level job. And Elaine interviewed me and gave me a key to the office at the end of the interview. Like, you're hired. We'll see you on Monday.
We needed the help.
Yep. So we've been working together for 15 years now.
And that was in the architecture firm.
Correct.
One.
Mm-hmm.
And so because you both started touching on accessibility and code. So how did that weave into that part of the journey? Or did you guys split at that point for the different parts of the journey?
It sort of happened at the same time. The architecture firm that we worked with co-officed with another accessibility consultant who was just one person. And they, had some life stuff come up and needed some help. And so kind of brought us both in simultaneously to help them fill some gaps while they were out for a long period of time. And then we just really enjoyed it. And we stayed kind of doing both tracks for several years, really, until we decided, okay, we really want to go all in on accessibility, which is a neat opportunity people don't get to have to kind of test out two pathways at the same time.
Yeah. And that's an interesting way to do it too. I know I talked to somebody that when they started their own firm, they actually were in the same office space as another small architecture firm. So they were able to help each other out when one had to go off on maternity leave, one had other health things. So, or just got swamped, and somebody got swamped and somebody got slow, and
you could share some resources.
Yeah. And so it doesn't even have to be another firm or another accessibility firm. You can leverage that same design mindset and understanding of code to help teach and help small businesses. So
absolutely.
So what fascinated you the most on accessibility that kind of sparked that interest?
Well, for me, it was kind of like I said earlier, being a small but big part in a bigger picture with these projects. We in the architecture firm, we were working on residential or small commercial spaces. And so when we kind of stepped our toes into the bigger accessibility realm, that's bigger commercial projects. That's different types of commercial projects, to like hospitals, to schools, to, of course, the big fancy offices. And so that kind of just opened our eyes of like, wow, these other, like this one track of accessibility really goes along with all different types of projects. And then there's different requirements for those types of facilities to be compliant, removing the barriers. And so that was kind of really fascinating for me, just the different types. And, it's not the mundane every day. I'm not sitting on AutoCAD all day. And I get to be more respected, I would say, in the field as being a kind of a subject matter expert and showing up and being an asset to help figure things out. I always say there's like the good cop and the bad cop. Like if I'm brought on early and in the design, like you can save the day and like, okay, this is going to be bad, but here's how we can fix it. Versus if I come in at the end, and I'm like, this is bad, we got to rip it out and start over. Then it's like, they don't really like us so much.
Yeah.
But I do like being on site, and the variety of projects is what I've come to love about it.
Yeah. And I know you guys also mentioned being on multiple projects rather than being on one project for a very long time. I know that can throw a lot of students off when they first start, because, you're used to one project for a semester, if not multiple. So you're kind of hitting multiple. And then you get into, if you're in a large firm, you're going to be stuck on a project for like 5 to 8 years. If you're lucky, it's that short, or the same client all the time. So how many projects are you guys typically working on the accessibility side?
Hundreds.
At one time?
Yes. So today I could get a call from one of probably 300 to 400 different projects asking a question. Luckily, we both have really good memories and recall ability, and are also very quick to coordinate in our files to recall items. But yeah, I mean, We are such a small piece for most projects that we may be really heavy during a small portion of design, and then we don't hear from them for 2 years, but then something comes up during construction and there's an issue that they didn't expect. And so, the life of the project, we are still maybe involved that whole, 2, 4, 5 years, but we may not even think about that project for a year at a time.
Yeah. You're not in the day-to-day weeds of every little nuance. So yeah, I know like my shock face at 100, but it's like, you're more focused on a specific area. You don't have to remember 100 projects and every little detail on what's going on everywhere.
Right.
That's definitely a different amount of mental power. Like it's more juggling, but similar systems and how you're pulling it together.
Right.
So
I was going to say, we do have some help on the back end. So the lovely admin help that kind of keeps our brains like focused on those organization tasks.
You always need the brain checks.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I know we were joking before the podcast on me checking my own brain and sending emails. So where did the idea of Contour Collective come from and starting to go off on your own?
Sure. So, we kind of started as the architecture firm, and we were kind of helping another consultant do their stuff. And then we realized, hey, we really like doing this. We like it more than what we're doing, and we'd like to do it as a women-owned business. There was a need for that, in the construction world. There's not many women doing things. And so, that was a need for that. Also, when you go for public projects, the WBE status is heavily weighed. And so we just found, kind of an open door and a newfound passion that we wanted to pursue. So we kind of, thought about it and came up with an idea and a plan, and the name Contour Collective. We started with the word collective because we wanted to not necessarily pigeonhole ourselves into one focus. Although our heavy focus is accessibility, we didn't want to put that in the name because we still have a passion for design, whether it be furniture or artwork or whatever. So the collective is kind of like just an overall encompassing word for whatever idea we might have at the time. And then the contour is kind of, it's a word that's used in drawings for topography lines, but it's also more of a free form shape. And so, our work is fluid and coming up with new ideas and concepts that kind of help everybody. So it's not, a straight, narrow, hard line. It's flowing. And so we also wanted a short word that we could just say contour instead of, so lots of thought went into it, but
bunch of lengthy words or avoiding the initials. But it's smart to think of it that way because you never know when you want to pivot the business. Like someday you may not be doing as much accessibility, and who knows what that would be, or bringing on more resources or other experts. Then you don't have to like go through a whole rebrand.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, if we wanted to bring on another partner, but they really focus on interiors, something like that, it fits right in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so, but stepping back on the accessibility side, I know you guys are both registered accessibility specialists. How do you become a registered accessibility specialist, and what's that process? I don't even think I knew that existed until somebody introduced me to you guys.
Yeah, so that is probably because you are not based in Texas. And so it is one area where Texas actually has a higher level of regulation than a lot of other states. And so here in Texas, every commercial project that has a public accommodation component to it has to have a registered accessibility specialist on the project. That reviews the plans and then does an inspection after construction. So in Texas, there's, a bigger market for accessibility consulting in general. And so, that's how we kind of got pulled into it. But we also then started to learn a lot more than just the Texas focused part and really broadened to general ADA, fair housing, IBC, all kinds of accessibility requirements that would be more national. And so we also are both nationally certified ADA coordinators, which is typically meant for a city or government agency for, somebody who's sort of maintaining ADA compliance on their end, but really broadens the scope of accessibility beyond a typical building code only. And then to be, registered for these, you have to take a couple of specific coursework on it. And then typically there's a prerequisite to have a degree in a built environment field, architecture, engineering, interiors, landscape, etc. And then there's, like everything else, some exceptions to that. You can do some extra years of work without that degree to get it as well.
And then I'm assuming there's some type of exam, or is it just the courses?
Yeah, there is an exam for both of those certifications.
Gotcha. And I know you guys were mentioning kind of where you plug in the process. So what scope are you handling? I don't know if it is a requirement that Texas has that you have to come in at certain points in that process or review. Like what's the requirement on the Texas side?
Yes, the minimum base requirement is to do one review of drawings, usually around a permit set, although the timeline isn't defined, and then to do one inspection after the project is constructed. And after that inspection, you'd issue a report if there's anything found to be a violation, and then the owner would be obligated to retrofit and fix that after the fact. So, of course, you don't want to get to the end and have all these issues and have to go rip out stuff. So we do love working with folks who want to integrate us more throughout the process so that we can kind of help be part of the team in coming up with finding these issues before they happen, and then also assisting with solutions along the way. So depends on the client and the project. We, can be involved the whole process, or we might just plug in these little pieces.
Yeah, because I find I'm just thinking of all my hospital work. If I'm waiting until the permit's set to have you guys review things, things in hospitals get tight and down to the inches because you're just trying to maximize the space you have because there's a very high cost per square foot. I wouldn't want to wait till permit's set to have you guys review. It's like, hey, here's overall layout, what we're thinking, doors, placements, go take a review before I go design the whole thing in case there's a major issue that would be a big redesign, because a big redesign at permit set is going to be just as costly for an architecture firm, probably not as costly as let's rip out all the walls in construction. But from a firm profit standpoint, a lot of firms aren't making that much profits anyway, that could break them breaking even on a project.
Yeah, you're right on that. And those types of projects, those bigger, large scale projects, I'd say most firms do engage us early on just for that reason alone. Like, let's get it right the first time. And so we'll do multiple kind of reviews at different stages, even one as early as SD sometimes. So usually those bigger projects, even if the client or the owner hasn't thought about it, because they're just thinking of like, I got to check these boxes, we're just going to do what the state requirement is. We'll kind of have that discussion of, hey, let's think about this. You may want to do that. And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. We just thought we had to do, just do these minimal things. And then they realize the value added to those. So typically we are involved more heavily on those big projects.
Yeah. And I'm finding some bigger clients now are now requiring architects to come in and do that inspection at the end. And inspection's a bad word for an architect. We don't want to inspect anything.
Right.
Just to be able to point blame. So do you guys ever offer services to owners directly that may, if they don't need you on the design team side or the architecture firm didn't think to bring on an accessibility specialist, does an owner ever bring you on just to, hey, I just finished a project, or I need to look at my existing facility. What's your review?
There's all kinds of ways that we might work for an owner versus a designer. But a lot of times is during kind of a purchasing process, due diligence, we'll go in and assess existing facilities, sort of let them know what they're going to get themselves into, especially if they're doing any kind of renovation work. And then a lot of times we will come in on the owner side, not necessarily as an owner's rep, but to sort of defend their point of view if the architect or the contractor has a different consultant, so that there's, two opinions. Want to make sure that everybody converges on what the true, requirement and interpretation is. And so we can really be a strong defense for an owner in that way. And then, of course, we also do some expert witness type of work. So if there is, unfortunately, a lawsuit or moving towards complaints, then we may be, more directed to have conversations with the owner, of course, to let them know what their liability is, but also how they could correct the remedy.
Yeah, because I know a couple of large businesses kind of got hit hard with some of those. I know a local grocery store had to redo like half of their store's ADA parking spots because the slope was too steep. And as soon as you get one person that actually knows the code, and, people sometimes are sue crazy.
Yeah.
So, but saw that and I was like, oh, that's all that patchwork. And then, explain it to people who aren't in the AAC industry. Here's why this is going on.
Right.
So what types of projects are best suited to bring an accessibility consultant on board?
Well, first of all, I would say all of them, because access for everybody is very important, right? But it is required by law for all commercial public accommodation type projects at the federal ADA level. We are based in Texas, so we have that Texas level code, but then the ADA is always big brother because it's a civil rights code law. And so, equal access is the nature of that. And so it can be applied to most all projects, but specifically the commercial, public, governmental type facilities. And then within housing, there's another federal law, the Fair Housing Act. And so that applies to your typical multifamily facilities. There's some nuances with that that could trigger additional compliance. So, your big multifamily projects are also subject to comply. And so I would say about 50% of our work is on multifamily housing. That can be market rate, high-rise condos to affordable housing. So it really runs the gamut. It doesn't matter who's renting or owning. It's triggered by how many units are in a building. So we do a lot of work, like I said, in multifamily and then the commercial realm. But we can work for architects, we can work for developers and owners, that we do some roadway work with civil engineers for sidewalks, any pedestrian infrastructure. We get brought on board for that too. And then of course your parks with landscape architects. So anything in the built environment, we can be involved with.
Yeah. And that just also helps with like variety of work too.
Yes.
So. Yes. Yeah. It's fun to mix it up.
Yeah. I've never done a multifamily one, but I think of my brain goes to hotel and how there's only a certain number of ones that have like ADA bathrooms. Right. So is there just a certain number in multifamily that need to hit that at that point? And it's just luck on who's renting, because it's, you're renting one spot. Does an owner have the obligation to upgrade the restroom if it's not ADA compliant?
Multifamily is very interesting because there's actually layers of different types of units. So on a multifamily project that's subject to the Fair Housing Act, every ground floor unit and every unit served by an elevator has some level of accessibility requirements. I would say it's a very low level, but there's still some level, wide enough doorways so people can get through, some minimal clearances, heights of outlets and switches. Mm-hmm. And then there's a requirement for 2% of the units to be a higher level of accessibility called a type A unit, where you might have knee space under a sink, but you still have cabinets that can be removed if somebody needs it, for example.
Gotcha.
And then if you have affordable housing where you're receiving, some federal money, there's another level of type of unit called an accessible unit or a mobility unit that's even more truly accessible for users.
Got it.
I'll also add,
I know.
Yeah, we didn't touch on the residential like the single family type of project. So that's not a requirement really by any accessibility code. But we do like to help people that are considering aging in place in their homes, like planning for the future. And that kind of brings back our passion for design from our residential design experience. So we can help folks plan for the future, maybe put in some bigger doorways from the get-go, put in blocking in the walls for, grab bars in your restrooms and things like that. I was fortunate enough to be able to help out a local organization called Returning Wounded Warriors. It's for vets that came back that were wounded and needed special accommodations in their homes. And so I was able to go in and meet the families and understand their needs and then come up with a plan of how to modify their home. It's, you see put a ramp outside, kind of things like that. But understanding too that the typical codes that are in place may not benefit everybody. And so really figuring out what they specifically needed and helped them come up with solutions is another aspect of how we can be a part of a project. Yeah, because codes they're meant to be there for a reason, but sometimes they're not conforming to everybody. Mm-hmm. So I have a friend that is taller than the minimum ceiling height I am allowed to do. Wow. So I joke with him. I'm like, you break the code. And so if I'm out and there's a sign that's low and I'm like, sorry, theoretically somebody can hang it that low. So now I add a couple inches to the code as I meet people that are outside of the code.
Yeah.
But definitely getting in and helping just to make sure people aren't paying for things twice if they don't have to, if they're setting up something.
Right.
Shifting a little bit on the business side. So I know you guys are coming up on your 10-year anniversary. Yeah. Do you have any advice or big lessons learned being small business owners?
Well, probably spend the whole hour talking about that.
Hopefully you like each other. We'll start with that.
Yeah, fair. Yes. Know each other before you go into business, for sure. No, it's really wild that we're about to be 10 years. Kind of can't believe that. But I think my kind of biggest takeaway is that life is still going to happen during your career or your business. Some of it good, weddings, I got married, I had a baby, and then, other things that are more challenging, health issues, death in the family. And so really realizing that stuff is going to come up and you have to be able to navigate around it. And you have to be able to sometimes put the business to the wayside and deal with what you need to deal with. And so I cannot imagine doing this without a partner to lean on in those times, because really, there are times that one of us may need to kind of step away and not be so present for weeks at a time. So I think that's kind of my biggest lesson learned, is just to give a little bit of room in the schedule, in your brain, for things to happen. And I think that comes up with staff members too, right? Giving grace to folks who need it. And then also with clients, something comes up, you can't meet a deadline, let them know. And most of the time, if not all of the time, they're totally understanding. And it is what it is. And so I think that kind of leads to my second biggest thing I would say is communication. Just communicate what's going on. If things need to change, something comes up, let folks know, and people get it for the most part. Yeah, because it's more just letting people know. I tend to don't tell my engineers, but I make their deadline a lot earlier than what it needs to be until they build that trust with me that they'll actually get me stuff on time and I have time to review it and it'll be accurate. Yeah. So I'm not up late, but if they learn as they start hitting those deadlines and they just need an extra day or an extra half a day, I'm fine with it. I'm like, oh yeah, you need an extra half day, send it to me end of day. I'll look at it in the morning, and I can be flexible in that way. But sometimes you just need to ask, don't just assume my hard deadlines are hard. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes there's flex in it, or it's like a quality control deadline and not real. So we do that with each other. We're like, oh, we're going to start at 1:00, and we both know, okay, we're not really going to start till 1:30. Yeah. But we have talk and catch up. Yeah. The good and bad thing about being friends before owning a business. It's easy to be like, she's not going to get mad at me.
Yeah. She's going to be late too. Yeah. But how do you guys find clients?
are you focused? I know we talked about owners and being a consultant for architects. So how does the BD side of the business go? Does somebody taking the arm of that, or are you guys like, how for consultants?
Sure.
Would you reach out?
I'd say when we first started out, it was like, go to every network event, right? Go network with that developer, go network with that architect. So we were kind of stretching ourselves thin sometimes, like going to all these events. And I'm always like, well, I don't want to go by myself. So then we're like double booking to go together. And so, we did a lot of network feelers out early on. We also started offering lunch and learns, and we would say, hey, we can come in and give your crew an hour of our time. And then they can do the self-reported hour that they need for the health and welfare credit. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, yeah, come in. Right. And so then we would have all our business cards and bring them cookies or whatever. And so that, definitely helped. And then we also just started signing up or applying, I guess, to be a speaker at conferences. And then that's kind of a big network marketing for us too. We're both really passionate about that education side too. And if we can, enlighten some people for the day and be like, oh yeah, that, we love doing that. And then if we can get business out of it too, it's a win-win. So that's, luckily we don't have to go to so many networking events anymore. But now it's more of like kind of volunteering and being part of groups within our AEC industry. But I think our biggest marketing is really referrals and word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And keeping the clients that you have happy. And if they're happy, they'll probably use you on the next project too. And so that's kind of our big, what keeps us going.
Yeah. And that goes to kind of the comment when you guys started versus now you guys are 10 years in. So it's, you're new, start, go out, get out, network, and just let people know you exist. Mm-hmm. You're here to help, and shifting the business as you need it to shift and grow as you grow. So
right.
I think that's important. But it also leads me to my next question, because I know you guys are both in Austin, Texas right now, going into the TXA Conference, and you guys are actually giving 2 presentations this year. So I'm very lucky that I stole you guys before you jumped into conferencing. Can you let's jump into both. I know the titles of both, if you can let me know what you're going to be talking about in them. So I know the first one is doing a walking and rolling accessibility tour for the good and the bad architectural elements and barriers. So what are you talking about in that presentation?
Yeah, so this is our favorite type of presentation because we can give them anywhere, all over the country. We've done them for landscape conferences where we're more outside focused, obviously, on the built environment. And now we're going to be focused on the architects. And so we'll do more interior type discussions. But the conference is actually in Houston. And
that's
so
close.
We're down. We live in Austin, but we're in Houston for the conference. And so we show up to the tour, the location, and we do our own walking assessment of finding barriers. And it's very unfortunate that it's very easy to find things that are wrong. But then we find good examples too. And we definitely highlight the good examples for designers. And so we kind of just start kind of high level with a group of people, and talk about, we're going to make a little route through the building, and we might go outside and we'll just kind of walk and talk about what we see. We'll kind of quiz the people like, okay, do you see anything wrong? And if it's wrong, like, do you have a solution? How would you fix this? Or what would you do better to make it right? And so that's really fun to do because it's not a PowerPoint presentation, right? People get to get outside, so they really enjoy that. But we get to have a special guest with us this time. His name is Archer. He's the founder of Archer's Challenge. He too is in a wheelchair, and so he gets to add his perspective that really, really nails it home for people. But his philanthropy is also education as well. And so we love having discussions with him. And his big thing is like, these codes, they're the minimum, you can do better. And he talks about how the minimum code doesn't work for him. He may need something bigger, or he may need something different. And so we are really excited to have him with us and roll along with us on our walking and rolling tour.
So how does that work, coordinating that with the conference itself? Like, when you apply to conferences, it's usually, thinking it's going to be a presentation. What's your script? Like, sure, what do you need? Or how do the tables move for you? But since you're doing like an obstacle course,
we do put a little effort up front and be like, okay, we can kind of do this route. We kind of do the Google Maps and, keep it. We understand we have about an hour and we try not to traverse more than a mile. And we've kind of learned, okay, you can kind of walk and talk leisurely. We don't want people to get out of breath, and we definitely want our routes to be accessible. So we do map them as best we can, as part of our kind of application, and we'll kind of map it out for them and tell them what our agenda is. And then they ask us too, like, how many people can you accommodate? Well, we make sure that we have kind of like microphones with us. So we obviously want people to hear us so we can accommodate really big groups. We don't want to turn anybody away, of course. And so that's kind of how we outline it.
Yeah. And how many wheelchairs are you going to have for TXA?
Oh, not everybody's in a wheelchair. It's just, it's just the attendees.
Okay.
But we've had many, many participants in wheelchairs.
Because I figured that'd be the big thing. Somebody wants to jump in. Okay, I'll go do it. And
yes, that is what Archer's challenge is about, actually. He would do a big event at University of Texas on campus, and all the campus kids would come and get to participate and be in a wheelchair for a certain amount of time. And then those are the challenges, Archer's challenge, to try to navigate through those barriers. He hasn't done it in a while since COVID, but that was his big activity he would do. Yeah.
And even thinking back, I went to school at Kent State University, so Ohio, generally flat, but Kent is very hilly, and I was a tour guide. And there were times I had parents on crutches or students in wheelchairs, and it's like crap. And you're just like, you're playing in your head the route you are told you should go, and it's okay. And you're trying to remember, is there a handicap door there? Is there a ramp, or is it just the steps? And having to like pivot on the fly when trying to show off a campus. And you want it is accessible, but even that route wasn't necessarily accessible in general. If it's somebody wearing a boot, I'm like, okay, we're going to be walking this far. Are you okay with that? Or try to find a wheelchair and grab them before they start the presentation side. But that was a whole nother level of like, just thinking, can I do my usual path, or do I have to go a different way because of the route and stairs? And there were just a lot of steps throughout campus. So definitely gets you to think differently.
Yeah, that's a great story, actually, to talk about, how it might be ADA compliant, right? But it may not work for everybody. And also sometimes the accessible route isn't that visible. It's not that easy to find or to figure out. And so as designers, we really obviously want to encourage folks to really have that mindset and think about, putting yourself, in that perspective to figure out, can you make additional routes that work without, added barriers, even if they might be allowed under the code.
Yeah, because you don't want somebody to not be able to go through a main entrance of the building because they're in a wheelchair and they have to go in some side entrance that's just to a hallway, and that's not welcoming and inclusive to everybody.
Right. Exactly.
Now, the other session is universal design, so I'm assuming touching into some of those components.
Yes. And did not mean to tee that up, but it did tee up very nicely into that question. So universal design, I don't know how familiar you are with it. It is a concept that's been around for a while, but it's starting to get a bit more momentum within the design industry, which is really exciting, and excited that TXA wants to highlight this as a topic for this week's conference. So the idea behind it is to go above and beyond the minimum, right? The ADA and other accessibility codes are a minimum, a baseline. They're a compromise. They're inherently political. The president of the US signs the ADA, right? And so there's a lot of lobbying that takes place. So not all parts of the code are really that helpful for all types of people with disabilities. And there's a lot of types of disabilities that are not really factored into the ADA. And so universal design is really changing that mindset to say, let's be inclusive. Let's design for all abilities. And let's not just design for disabilities as something we have to do as the ADA, but let's really think through how can we make environments and spaces, give opportunities to all kinds of folks, all abilities. And so, an example of that is folks that may have some kind of neurodivergence and so may have sensory issues or challenges, need moments in a building where they can take respite and have a break away, not be overstimulated by too many lights or colors. And so none of that is in the ADA, even though a lot of these are considered covered disabilities under the law of the ADA. So universal design really starts to touch into a lot of different other ways. We get into color choices and paints and textures and materiality and building in, welcoming alcoves and spaces for all people. And at the end of the day, you can tell I'm kind of passionate about this when I keep talking about it, but it's really just about providing choice. Different people need different things. People learn in different ways. Everybody knows that, and like you're saying, you have a friend who's too tall for the minimum code, and then you might have another friend who's too short for a lot of other uses. So really providing that choice, not putting everything at the same standard.
Yeah. And people grow and change. I know we talked about wounded warriors, like they weren't wounded before going to war. So they have to learn a different environment. And some things may either be triggers or triggers of frustration of things they used to be able to do. So if they can't do stairs anymore, that may be frustrating while they're learning a new way of moving around, or senior citizens that used to be able to go on hikes and now their knees are bad. So they need areas to stop and rest. It's having those options that everybody kind of grows and changes, and we're not all just young and in our 20s forever.
Yes. Yeah. What you need today might be different than what you need tomorrow.
Exactly. And even just figuring out, like, I know we talked before the show that I'm pregnant. And so it's, people ask, you get the lunch and learn. So what's your dietary needs? And I'm like, right. Can I write pregnancy dietary needs? Because there's a whole list of things I'm not allowed to eat now for lunch and learns that then I now just ask ahead of time, what did you order? And I'll go figure if I need to go get my own food or not, or I need water constantly. So it's like, well, now I'm looking for, like, where are the drinking fountains? Like, how can I make sure my water bottle's full? Or if it's a hot day, I can't do as many hills anymore. I got to go take sip breaks, and I don't usually take sip breaks. So it's weird how things change, even if they are temporary or more permanent. So,
yeah, there's a common phrase kind of in the accessibility community that we are all only temporarily able, that, it's going to happen to everybody. It's going to happen to all of us. And it's really interesting too, to see the numbers of people with disabilities increasing, and you kind of think about why, but there's a lot of good reasons why, is that, our healthcare system has come up with ways to save people's lives that maybe weren't able to survive before. And people are living longer, but having some other needs that come up.
Yeah. So that will be a good one. I'll have to see if I can get you guys to do a lunch and learn for my form on it. So, because we do a lot. But
we'd love to.
And I always like wrapping out my podcast with this final question. And I don't know if you both want to answer it. But what advice would you give for young professionals just starting their careers?
I'll go first. It took me a while to learn this. And so I want to say for the young folks to to learn it early, is that your peers that do the same job you do are not your competition. That's hard to swallow sometimes because like, no, I want the job, but as you get older and you get more deep into your profession and you may lose the passion sometimes because you are so busy, having those connections with your peers as a valued resource to help you, or, we deal with code all the time, right? And so there's different interpretations for codes. Who are you going to ask? Where are you going to ask the next, your competitor, right? Maybe what they think and how they look at things. And so, be a cheerleader for your competition too, and celebrate everybody. Everybody has different, like Andrea said, everybody's at a different time in their life of what they're going through. And so it's not a competition.
Yeah. But I think even senior professionals could use that lesson. Just, we are all competing for work, and, sure, it's a competition. You want the owner to select you, but at the same time, people get into some very heated competition with each other. And so it's, you can be a little bit nicer to each other, celebrate somebody else winning a project or building up their firm, or, other things beyond just, oh my gosh, you got the job that I wanted to start my career. You never know when you're going to end up partnering on a project or finding a business partner or needing to ask somebody for help or guidance on a project. So I think that's great at all stages.
Yeah, I think, this is such a hard question because there is obviously a lot of advice that you can give to people. And I think about what I wish I would have known differently. And I think I'll just try to limit it to two. But one is that you don't have to be the top person in your field, in your firm, whatever it is. I think, especially now with social media, we just see all of the fanciest projects, the biggest names, this kind of notoriety around it. And the truth is that most people working in our industry are not at the top, and it doesn't mean you aren't successful. It doesn't mean that you are not contributing to society. And so, we have a really small local business, and I don't think we aspire to be this huge firm that's going to do all this kind of, amazing, notorious projects. But at the end of the day, I feel like even if I left working tomorrow, that we've really made a big difference in society and in our community. And so don't succumb to that pressure, I would say. And then kind of part of that community aspect is just to get involved in your local AIA chapter, or, if you're in a different discipline or you're curious about pursuing, maybe you studied architecture, but you might want to pursue landscape, go to the local ASLA chapters and the ASCE, NAWIC, the National Association of Women in Construction. We went to a few meetings, and it's turned into a really amazing organization that we help support every year now. And then mentor, right? I've been part of the ACE mentor program in Austin for 8 years. There's chapters all over the place. It's an amazing way to both give back to the next generation, meet other people, to network, and then also to remind yourself why it is that you chose to do this profession in the first place.
Yeah. Do you ever get any weird questions from high school students? I've also volunteered for ACE in the past. Yeah. And it's, when they come in, they think architect, engineer, contractor, and they're just trying to figure out what those three do. And I can see you coming in saying, hey, I'm an accessibility consultant. They're like, what?
Yeah.
Can do that?
One person knew what it meant, but most don't. So it's cool though, because get to come in and kind of expose folks to something different. And, you don't have to take a classic traditional career path. I'm sure you didn't imagine when you were going to architecture school that you're going to be hosting a podcast.
No.
But there's so many opportunities within kind of these offshoots as well. And so I think, that's neat from the high school side. One thing that I find is really interesting is we do have a lot of high school students who will ask our guest speakers how much money they make. Wow. And kind of brazen, but it's a fair point. I think when I was going into career, nobody talked about money. I didn't even have any idea what what people make, what you should make, what you should ask for, how you should negotiate fees and salaries. And I think it's something that's important to think about if you're deciding to begin a career or potentially make a career shift. Like, you do need to understand the financial, longevity that you may have within that field.
Yeah, because like my parents didn't know anything about what an architect does. And, my husband jokes, like, when you go to the doctor and they say what occupation, that I actually have an occupation that's directly listed. Yeah. And so, but you're up there with like doctor, lawyer, architect when people list random careers. And so you would think it's as high paying as a doctor or a lawyer. So, or you go on Glassdoor and put an architect and then get all the IT architects. And so it can be deceiving if you don't know the proper words or the right way to look for it. So I'm not surprised. Good for the kids.
Yeah.
I would have been scared to even ask.
And it's funny because the contractors in the room, they want to kind of jump in and say, hey, we'll pay you a lot because they want the work, and they need it too. And there is a lot of avenue in the trades and other opportunities if, full college isn't in the cards for you. So yeah, it's a funny thing.
And they're fun. I've gone to a lot more trade events. And I think if I went to more when I was in high school, I may have ended up on a trades route rather than architect, because I think I enjoy it more. But now I kind of like the education and storytelling side. So
yeah,
you never know. But if I got exposure to it in high school, who knows? I would have potentially taken a different track.
Right.
So, but I wanted to thank you guys both for being on. I know you guys are jumping into conference this week and a lot going on. So I wanted to thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. And if anybody is interested in getting a hold of you, wants to learn about being an accessibility consultant or needs one on a project, what's the best way to get a hold of you guys?
I would say our website first. Well, maybe not. It needs to be really updated, but we can start there. It's contour-collective.com.
Okay. I will put it in the show notes.
Okay. So our emails are in there so you can get a hold of us. But it definitely needs to be updated. But I think it's a testament that, we're busy doing projects. Yeah. Busy and growing, and you never know when things need to change.
But we're also on all the social media stuff, and those we do have a marketing girl who does kind of all that for us. So she kind of keeps those up to date for us, but you can find us on all of those as well.
Yeah, I will put your website and any handles for different social media down below. So if anybody's looking to find you guys or just want to follow along on your story, they can do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Very fun.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.